Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. This time around we turn to Georgia, which recently has had more than their fair share of drama and eccentric politicians. You might think of Georgia as a former Soviet republic now famous for constantly being overshadowed by its large, aggressive neighbor, namely Russia. Lately, however, Georgia has been busy creating its own internal problems. Last year, Tbilisi saw major political tensions flare up over disputed election results. The ruling Georgian Dream party has tightened its grip, cracking down on opposition groups, independent media and civil society. They are using Vladimir Putin's playbook, minus the shirtless horseback riding. So, to get right into it, let's take a look at our latest report.
Former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili's prison sentence was extended to more than 12 years, a move he described as a death sentence in prison. The verdict found him guilty of illegally crossing the border when he returned from Ukraine in 2021.
I am being judged for daring and managing to transform Georgia into a successful state, for defeating corruption, for striving for the people and not for my own pocket. I was dangerous to the forces of evil as a president.
The former leader has already been convicted of embezzlement and abuse of power, charges that human rights groups widely consider to be politically motivated.
The so-called courtroom has become a breeding ground for injustice and lawlessness towards President Saakashvili as the main political opponent of Bidzina Ivanishvili, but also towards dozens of other political prisoners.
A vocal opponent of the ruling Georgian Dream party, Saakashvili has accused the government of steering the country closer to Moscow and stifling democratic freedoms. The European Union has repeatedly called for Saakashvili's release, citing concerns over his health and the fairness of his imprisonment. However, Georgia's government has shown no signs of relenting, further deepening tensions between Tbilisi and Western nations.
And now let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili was once a pro-Western reformer, but later on came under severe criticism due to his treatment of political opponents. This has also initiated his long-lasting clash with the current ruling Georgian Dream party. His arrest in October 2021, after secretly returning from Ukraine, was the culmination of years of political and legal rivalry.
Saakashvili fell out with the ruling Georgian Dream party due to deep political and ideological differences. After leading Georgia from 2004 to 2013, Saakashvili became a strong critic of Georgian Dream, accusing it of corruption, authoritarianism, and aligning the country closer to Russia instead of the West. Georgian Dream, founded by billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, came to power in 2012, defeating Saakashvili's United National Movement. Over time, tensions between the two sides escalated, with Saakashvili frequently denouncing the government's policies. After leaving office, he moved to Ukraine, where he became involved in politics and was later stripped of his Georgian citizenship. In October 2021, ahead of Georgia's local elections, Saakashvili returned to the country in secret, despite facing criminal convictions in absentia for abuse of power. His return was seen as an attempt to rally the opposition against Georgian Dream. However, he was quickly arrested upon arrival and jailed. His supporters and international organizations view his prosecution as politically motivated, while the government insists it is enforcing the law. Saakashvili's imprisonment has sparked widespread protests, international condemnation, and calls from the European Union for his release, further deepening Georgia's political crisis.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Since claiming the win in the parliamentary elections last October, Georgian authorities escalated their authoritarian moves, raiding opposition offices, detaining journalists, and shutting down critical NGOs. The West, predictably distracted by wars in Ukraine and Gaza, has begun to look away. And this neglect isn't going unnoticed by Georgia's government, which has taken the international silence as a tacit green light to clamp down even harder. Remember, authoritarian regimes thrive in silence, much like mold thrives in damp, dark places. And the smell isn't getting better with time. But why should you care about what's happening in Georgia anyway? Well, Aside from the humanitarian reasons like democracy and human rights, there is also the geopolitical chessboard. Georgia sits strategically at the doorstep of both NATO and the European Union. Yet, the government's crackdown isn't exactly helping their membership application to the EU. Moreover, the situation threatens Tbilisi's stability at a time when regional tensions are already high. To the north, Russia still occupies Georgia's two breakaway regions, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, making Georgia's democratic backsliding not just problematic, but outright dangerous. And it's not just external threats either. Internally, frustration is building. Georgia's younger generations, who have grown up following the collapse of the Soviet system, have no nostalgia for authoritarianism. They demand genuine democracy, transparency, and actual accountability. When youth protests start filling the streets, history shows governments that ignore young people's demands usually don't end up on the winning side. But so far, the Georgian Dream government has managed to thwart the protests, albeit with increasingly excessive force. The European Union and the United States have issued their usual strongly worded statements. What's needed now are actually clear, tangible actions, more sanctions, targeted restrictions, and a more forceful diplomatic posture. Because if Georgia's democracy is allowed to wither unnoticed, it sets a dangerous precedent for other fragile democracies around the world. Democracy is, at its core, a fragile system, whether it's in Tbilisi or elsewhere, and silence only aids those who want to turn democracy into just another forgotten dream. And speaking of Georgian Dream, if you're listening, maybe it's time to live up to your name and actually support democratic values rather than, crushing them. Otherwise, the only thing dreamy about Georgia, apart from your wines and chinkali, will be the illusion of democracy you've tried so hard to maintain. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is George Mchedlishvili, Associate Professor at the European University in Tbilisi. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So let's begin with the extended prison sentence for Mikhail Saakashvili. What is your opinion on that? What does it tell us about the legal system and, by extension, also the government system in Georgia today?
Okay, so that's a very serious and I would say multifaceted question. On the one hand, of course, there are the signs of political persecution. But on the other hand, there are signs of a punishing of a person whose rule was marked by serious infringements on the human rights and human rights abuse, particularly in the latter year of his governance. So although it is sure that there is a political component in that punishment, so this is actually kind of like the showcasing, the punishing of the recalcitrant leader who is obviously kind of the strongest opposition leader. But on the other hand, the record of Mikhail Saakashvili is far from clean, and being a leader of serious reforms, really comprehensive reforms that put Georgia on the map and will put Georgia on the track to the rapprochement with the West, is not the justification for significant abuses of human rights and lack of democratic governance. So very early on in his governance, particularly after 2005, 2006, he started to conflate actually his the power rather than an institutional mechanism, like as a personal tool. So I believe that there is a significant case for this persecution. Although, of course, one cannot deny that the current leadership using it for their own political goals, for their own political ends, and they try to showcase it and to gain more political points on that.
So this is a remarkably difficult situation there, because some human rights defenders and opponents of the Georgian Dream Party from abroad would often like to see this sort of simple image. Mikhail Saakashvili, the political prisoner, gradually withering away in confinement, being denied all the basic necessities, and now receiving another sentence. But as you said, this image is actually much more complex, and also it is made even more complicated by the fact that this case was actually brought before the European Court of Human Rights. And back in 2024, they said they found no major irregularities, right?
Indeed. So it is very unfortunate that oftentimes certain members of European bureaucracy, particularly European Parliament, particularly associated with the European People's Party, which is a partner of United National Movement, they take a very one-sided, oversimplistic picture of this political figure, highly divisive and very controversial political figure. So, I guess he deserves a special one-hour program because his achievements, particularly in the first term of his office, are undeniable and significant. But on the other hand, very serious human rights abuses and very big cases, by the way, against his and his regime in that very human rights court and in the European court.
But would that warrant the treatment that he is receiving right now? Because if we say, okay, so the conviction was upheld in this regard, but what about what's happening to him today? Does he really deserve to be treated in the way that he has been treated by the Georgian Dream Party, its officials and the judiciary?
Again, it's remained to be determined exactly what are these details of the treatment. But some images show emaciated figure of the person who lost 50, 60 kilograms. Then in a few months, we'll see that person who is just well trimmed. It seems that he is actually formally in a hospital and they get some treatment. I think that sometimes there is also the attempt by certain forces related to Saakashvili to darken the picture of his treatment. So, the current picture. So, was it made few weeks ago, few months ago, or years ago? Because we see the significant change over time. So, for instance, this is a video was made about 2 years ago, currently on the screens. After that, so seems that his health conditions improved significantly. I don't know what are the conditions now at the moment. But again, there is also lack of trust in regard of this medical assessment, because we get also controversial assessment in this regard as well.
And would you say that the decision of President Salome Zurabishvili not to pardon him was a correct one? This is another thing that is often confounding for outside observers, because they say, okay, if he is a political prisoner, why didn't President Zurabishvili release him?
Well, so there is no love lost between Zurabishvili and Saakashvili, particularly in the previous decades. So the President Zurabishvili was persecuted by Saakashvili when she was an opposition figure years before. And again, she believes that there is a case, and no matter about the possible abuses of the treatment, but the general case against Saakashvili probably has some more than grain of truth in it. So, on many occasions, Salome Zurabishvili was asked about possible pardoning of Saakashvili, but she either was refusing to answer, on the said she made a decision on this regard. And actually, because of this complexity of the system, just pardoning wouldn't mean his immediate release, because there were several cases against him. She could pardon her on one case, but there would be others.
So now, this case serves to emphasize that there is a lack of political unity. Meanwhile, the Georgian Dream Party continues to strengthen its grip on power. Now, can you tell us about any other instances in which recently the foundations of democracy have been undermined by the Georgian Dream?
Well, we do see the rollback in the democratic governments, unfortunately. So no matter what are these political paths of the opposition and the United Nations Movement and Saakashvili himself, we see the adoption of the increasingly draconian and undemocratic laws, particularly related to the mass demonstrations. Again, you could question the behavior of certain protesters, a small number of protesters, but the general, this broadside application of the rules and disciplining and trying to find them and to punish them, obviously indicates the lack of democratic credentials on the part of the current government. Yes, we see the rollback, and it is obviously very discouraging.
Now, what about the so-called foreign agent law? Because there were reports that the previous piece of legislation, which was widely criticized as being modeled after a similar initiative from Russia, this has been discarded. But apparently there is a new foreign agent law, and this one was modeled so closely after the American FARA legislation that apparently it contains mentions of institutions that do not exist in the Georgian legal system, such as Congress or the President of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. So right now, well, that is political calculation. You know, you can have the similar legislations, but when it is in a country with less established like political culture of democracy, of course, kind of this law could be abused by the government. It's like a cudgel in the hands of the government, which it could use at its choice. So, well, this is political calculation because the current Georgian leadership wants to, I would say, ingratiate itself to the current Trump administration. You know, they made a distinct political betting. So years before, you know, you might remember that a few years ago, they decided to sever ties with the European Social Democrats. They were a partner, just like United Nations movement was a partner of People's Party. Georgian Dream was a partner of the like Social Democrats, which is like mainstream, strong European party. They were good partners, but all of a sudden they decided to sever ties and try to attend these like conservative traditional rallies organized by Orban, attended, by the way, by some of the members of current Trump administration. So they betted distinctly on that, I would say, kind of like political wing. Right now, they want to reap benefits, I would say. So that's why they try to present themselves. We are very similar to the current U.S. administration. You know, you have power, we have power. We are traditionalists. We are for the conservative, traditional family values. No LGBTQ, no 75,000 genders, and something actually kind of like very traditionalist. So they try to present themselves as the political force similar to the current U.S. administration, but in the Eastern Europe.
But is it going to work? I mean, during the Trump inauguration, an invitation was extended to President Salome Zurabishvili as the legitimate leader of Georgia, and not to the president who was elected by, effectively, the Georgian Dream party. So does it perhaps signify that despite some obvious leanings, the Trump administration still realizes that in some cases there is simply no other way than to continue the previous course when it comes to maintaining pressure on parties like the Georgian Dream?
Well, I think that it remains to be seen. So far, the attention of the current administration haven't actually reached Georgia, so they tried from the like big fish like Russia, China, Russian-Ukrainian war, obviously. So Middle East situation, I think at some point, I think this moment is approaching when the Trump administration and these like members of the administration will take care of Georgia. And it remains to be seen how it develops. There was a sign about a week ago. The U.S. ambassador met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, something that would be unimaginable about a month ago because U.S. administration and embassy, they squarely denied the legitimacy of the election. But the fact that there was a meeting and there was a message from the State Department signifies that, well, some interactions is expected, but again, it is, well, I wouldn't predict the direction it will take.
One quick question. Would you say that perhaps it could be instructive to take a look at the situation in the Balkans, specifically Milorad Dodik, the leader of the Republika Srpska, who is hoping for support from the Trump administration, was actually criticized, I think it was by the Secretary of State, following the attempts that he made at basically disentangling the legal system of the Republika Srpska from the rest of the country?
Yes, it might be the indication. It might be like the writing on the wall. But again, I wouldn't make any like distinct prediction before kind of like we see the actual steps on the part of the administration.
So this remains very much an open question for the time being. George Mchedlishvili was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. Have a good day.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. The Trump administration has supposedly shut down a multi-agency initiative designed to track and counter Russia's hybrid warfare campaign against the West. The program, launched under the former President Joe Biden in 2024, sought to disrupt Russian sabotage, disinformation, and cyber attacks.
Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, US intelligence agencies have accused Moscow of conducting arson attacks, election interference, undersea cable damage, and assassination attempts to weaken Washington-led support for Ukraine. Despite warnings from US intelligence that Russia was escalating its activities, Trump officials reportedly ignored calls to continue the monitoring effort, at least according to Reuters. It remains unclear whether Trump explicitly ordered the suspension or if the agencies made the decision independently. While the extent of intelligence sharing with the European allies is uncertain, UK officials said routine exchanges continue, and the EU has indicated that coordination with NATO remains ongoing.
According to Reuters, the US government has halted funding for a Yale-based research team tracking Russia's abduction of Ukrainian children, leading to concerns that critical evidence of war crimes worth $26 million may have been erased. The move supposedly follows budget cuts by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency.
The Yale Humanitarian Research Lab had been monitoring the forced deportation of Ukrainian children, an act that Ukraine and human rights groups classify as genocide. The program's termination has reportedly led to the loss of satellite imagery and other key data, with sources claiming that extensive dossiers on abducted children have been permanently deleted. That information is yet to be confirmed. The program's defunding became public the same day that President Donald Trump spoke with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, though no ceasefire agreement was reached. The Ukrainian government has identified at least 20,000 deported children, but officials believe the true number could be as high as 150,000. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Putin and Russian official Maria Lvova-Belova over the abductions, though Moscow denies any wrongdoing.
A new report by Human Rights Watch has revealed that Central Asian labor migrants in Russia are increasingly being coerced into fighting in Ukraine. The report documents cases of forced military recruitment, deception and abuse targeting migrants from countries like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan.
According to the newly published HRW report, Russian authorities have used citizenship as a tool to fill military ranks. A law enacted in August 2024 allows the government to revoke the citizenship of naturalized migrants who fail to register for military service. As a result, 1/3 of the 30,000 Central Asians who had obtained Russian citizenship and registered for service were forcibly deployed to Ukraine. Mass raids were also conducted throughout the year to round up migrants for recruitment. The escalation of anti-migrant sentiment in Russia, especially after Caucasus City Hall terrorist attack in Moscow last year, has further fueled xenophobia and violence against Central Asians. Human rights activists warn that migrants are increasingly being used as a human resource for Russia's war effort, deepening their vulnerability to exploitation and abuse.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.